We have gone into a time that was called the synthesis panel. And what I'd recommend is this for that purpose. First of all, just a few quick observations. One thing that's been so powerful about this place and this conference has been the engagement of people across many different countries, across many different age groups, across many different professional perspectives. And so this intellectual diversity and diversity in every other way is extremely valuable in terms of doing something new, something innovative, and again, making a big difference. So I think, again, the diversity in opinions have been critically important. Just another quick opinion that I'll give before I'll turn it over for the rest of the synthesis is that I hope we can all be as self-critical of our work before we go forward and discuss it, as Dr. Kidwell has been not only self-critical of his own, but also of our own. So, I mean, the point is, when you go forward with something, it's got to be ready to stand harsh scrutiny. And that harsh scrutiny means that we have to be certain of what we put forward. From a business perspective, I hope all companies will be as careful when they roll out a new product as National Instruments has been as they're to develop their products. Their products hit the market, they're highly reliable, they can become the staple in which new foundational businesses can be founded because of the high reliability of the products they market. So if I had a wish, if you will, for this community, it's one to prosper. But as I've said many times again, for any community scientifically at an international scale or otherwise, the best advocacy is objectivity. And so again, it's been very exciting to see the different views, the different thoughts, etc. But for us to have that impact that Mike McCoubre and others have mentioned, it's going to require, again, that extreme level of placing our personal bar, whether that be as a scientist or the bars of our company, way, way up. Never go forward with a product until you're absolutely certain it meets the claims. Never go forward with a paper without thoroughly disclosing what still remains uncertain and yet to resolve. Again, that self-criticality, that objectivity. I often told my students when I was lecturing, I don't believe in science. I truly mean that. I don't believe in science. Science is not a belief system. Science is the scientific method that leads you objectively to the truth, and I would claim it's the only thing that does. Okay? So again, I think it's been a wonderful conference, but now, during the synthesis phase, what I'd like to do is open this to a broader community reaction to what we've heard by this very, very good panel in terms of looking forward. And I certainly love the observation that you have to look back to look forward. And I certainly think that's profound as well. But let me just ask now in the synthesis panel that we first open it to people who have chaired, say, sessions or panels here in the during the conference. First, any comments from anyone who's chaired a panel during this this venue? And I would include you, Dave, given your...
Well, if I can speak for
Please, because you led a great presentation.
Thank you very much. I had fun yesterday talking about patents to the people that were interested. I really appreciated the panel. Some of the remarks were poetic, and certainly it's inspiring, and we all believe in the potential future. But I want to make an observation. There's a big gulf between academic research and commercialization. And I want to talk about the three issues that will lead to commercialization, and I'll be very short. The first is producing power. That's not a real issue for the scientists, it's an issue for the engineers. But as I'm going to indicate later, 1 megawatt at 25 degrees centigrade isn't worth very much. You can melt ice. The second issue is coefficient of performance. It takes 3 barrels of oil to make 1 barrel of electricity. If you don't have a COP of 3, you're in the hole. I was at ICCF-18 and I touched Dr. Solani's wonderful demonstration, inspiring demonstration. I burned my fingers on the Pyrex Class 2. But then I reflected that 48 watts of that heat came from the Korean Electric Company, COP of 25.25. And the last one is temperature. Heat doesn't cut it unless it's at a certain temperature. 100-degree water, it's got to run downhill in order to heat your bathtub or heat your house. So 100-degree water has got very low heat applications. 200 centigrade, well, now we're starting to get up into an area where there might be some commercial application. But the real gold is up there at 600 and 700 degrees. And that's where the commercialization will start. Because when you have that kind of temperature, you can make electricity. And if you're an investor, you want to know that you have a product you can sell. And what more vendible product is there than electricity? So, if you're going to do research in the future, it's wonderful that some people are looking for interesting information for scientific purposes. But if you want to have commercialization, you have to have a decent COP, 6 to 10, perhaps a little higher. Temperatures over 200, 3, 4, 5, 600, and the power will look after it because the engineers are there to scale up. Thank you very much.
David, excellent perspective. Other thoughts or comments responding? Let's see, I saw it here first and then next week.
Hi guys, this is my first time speaking. I'm Richard Cazell from Canada. We have a Prime Minister who has cut all funding, all research, and is not interested in research regardless of form. I recently spoke to a gentleman who's likely in line to become the next Prime Minister of Canada. And he was very familiar with what's going on in this field of cold fusion. His comment directly to me is that he will believe that cold fusion is real and works when it can boil a cup of water. If you want to have a demonstration that can shut up the skeptics and get this thing taken seriously, I propose the following simple experiment. Let's get a half a dozen researchers to climb up to the top of a mountain in Boulder, Colorado, near there. Set up a cold fusion experiment that produces heat and boil 4 or 5 cups of water and have tea. And show that to the media. That will end the critics. It's a very simple thing to do. We're cheating on a whole bunch of scientific facts by reducing pressure. I know that. It doesn't have to have specific calorimetry. All we need to do is show that we can boil water, and we're there.
Hello. I would like to share a little bit my experiment. I'm relatively new in the field. I'm 2 years old. But when I started the field, I had this crazy idea of use this cold fusion energy in the transportation industry. And I did that because I wanted to work with those companies that are relatively advanced in the field. They are not the corporation and the Italian, and that was a way to do partnership with them. And so the first presentation I did to try to raise some money was, I have this new energy, I'm working on this, and it's going to save the world. And I was treated as a lunatic. Then I changed a little bit my mind and the presentation, and I said, okay, I have this we're working on this device, and it can power a car with zero emission for 20,000 miles. And they say, great, but you're crazy. It's a nuclear reaction, and you don't want to put a nuclear reactor in a car. So basically, many people does not really understand anything about physics and about the difference of hot fusion, cold fusion, and any nuclear reaction. So now the way we're actually delivering the message is we're working on a company who is doing energy recovery system for the automotive industry. And we've been discussing with politicians. We're doing kinetic energy recovery, then heat recovery system. And by the way, we're working on this long-term technology where we can drive a car for a long period of time. And everybody applauds. So my message is, you need to, if you come with an idea with a too much disruptive technology, nobody will accept it and reject it. So you have to lead them with much smaller step that it accepted. And just to comment on the John Paul conception of the black hole, and I had exactly the same phenomenon. And one way, actually, if you come with a solution for low-cost clean energy, and you talk to politicians for that, they will not really understand, because you already have renewable energy solutions that are available. And if you say this is called fusion, they say we have a fusion program and it's extremely expensive and they won't make the difference. So there's another aspect, and it's actually very difficult to enter the energy business. So one way, actually, it's a different angle that MHI is trying to take, is to, instead of trying to do energy or detect neutrons, is try to reduce radioactivity in some radioactive material. And then, instead of having enemy in the energy business, you have lots of friends in the energy business, and lots of friends in the politics. In France, in Switzerland, in Germany, we're closing the nuclear plants. In France, they just reassess the cost of decommissioning a nuclear plant. So if anyone in the field finds a solution to reduce radioactive waste, the radioactivity of radioactive waste, then you have plenty of money, of government money, to get funding for the research. So that's a different approach, but I think it's worth.
I just wanted to talk about COP a little bit. If you can get a COP over 2, especially 3, then you're competing with heat pumps, and to provide space heat, which is roughly a third of the energy usage in the US. All you need is 50C. If I can get that, 100C would be great. 50C, and I'll talk to you. We'll make a commercial product.
About the sort of education, trying to create a kind of head of water, as it were, of people that want to get into this industry, and dealing with the black hole that John Paul Bideri talked about. It's, for me, and for a lot of people in the group, and I think you can maybe identify with this, it's about education. Even within this group, as Mike McCoubrey said, people don't seem to be reading the papers of others and seem to be repeating experiments, not as a replication, but because they're doing it because they think they're doing something new. If anyone has some ideas about simplifying particular aspects of this, I'd really like to see the MFMP facilitate creating infographics and 6-second animations for the 6-second generation. And with this, the power is kind of really easy to access information. You don't need to speak to someone until they glaze over before you've even got to the message that they need to understand. You just need to say, there's a little bit of resource that's going to take you 20 minutes to run through. I don't even want to talk about it, here's the web address. That's one way to educate, and that should bring in young people who can spend the time, and they've not got a closed mind to this, and even right the way up to any age. The other one is a live open science platform that we want to build in this next year, and we hope that many of you will choose to put your experiments on there, historical experiments, and keep it to a very simple format, and try and do live science through that. There may be a closed option as well for those that want to use exactly the same methodology whilst they're developing IP, and then they can release that when they've secured the IP. So every single stage of the intellectual property development is documented, time-stamped with the live data, which is then in a historical record. Live open science will allow people who have no particular vested interest or ability to access the field to contribute, and their contribution may be the contribution that makes this work, and it's in the record, time-stamped and date. No one has that kind of notion that I had the idea that would make this work, but it took them 40 years to get it. They can say it now, people can benefit from it and move forward.
To see the emergence of the new nonprofit, the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So very interesting to see where
If
that.
you have $10, it would really help.
I think, Annie, we registered today, I think, right? Yes, yes. So you've got our $10. So. At any rate, the point too that I keep coming back to is objectivity. Okay, when I say science is not a belief system, I mean that very strongly. It's a scientific method that allows you, regardless of your wants and hopes and dreams, to discern the truth. And so it's only on the basis of that truth that we can develop the new technology that will do what we all want to do, save the planet. The concern is that there have been situations where intellectually interesting things have been dismissed out of hand. And I think, again, we have to make a very persistent appeal for objective considerations of the results of this community, because any science in its infancy has to be nurtured somewhat to allow these results to be presented and discussed in an open forum. I like the quote by Nikolai, this wasn't so much Tesla as a very controversial figure, Nikolai Machiavelli. And although he said what I'm about to say in Italian, he meant it in the exact same way I'm about to say it in English. He said very emphatically, get real. And so that's the critical aspect here, that we have to be certain everything we do is very real. And again, there's a fascinating basis for a new science and a new understanding here that must, again, through the Jeffersonian method, through the scientific Galilean method, through the culture, if you will, of science, which I strongly believe in, to be able to explore these things to see really what's going on. So again, let's have a couple more comments in terms of the synthesis side of this conference, and then we'll move to close.
I'm very new to this space, and I came here to try to absorb what was going on from the luminaries in the space. And I've had the chance to talk to a whole bunch of the scientists here and pick their brains and ask them questions. And if I had to say just one thing, I think you guys need to be more open to each other's ideas, because sometimes two guys will have a theory that, in my view, is 80% common. And when you talk to them, they each say the other guy is clueless and has nothing worth value. And I won't put any names on it, but it's happened more than once with more than one person. And you guys need to listen to each other, because you've all got a piece of the puzzle and nobody has the whole picture.
Say that's not isolated to this community. I find outstanding intellectual communities and outstanding faculty, like at this university. Many times the disputes just involve me sitting there translating English into English, just making sure that what's said by one party is compiled by the other. So that often can resolve many of these things. And I'd like to compliment again Tom Tassel for a very interesting alternative hypothesis that was gained by seriously reading and considering the work in this community by many different authors over many decades. So
16 years ago.
16 years ago.
No, the Nazi paper was 1998. I finally read it.
This way to do it.
Just one thing. The people from Hot Fusion are saying that in 50 years they have a device, you know? And that has been said for 50 years. And in the Cold Fusion community, since the very beginning, we say that in 3 years we have a device. So every time we think in 3 years we have a device. I've been to many of these conferences. I missed the first 3, but I guess it was the same idea then. In 3 years we have a device. So the problem is we are selling the devices. People are waiting for a standalone system, whereas we are still in the scientific side, and we should sell science and not devices. Because as long as we go into devices, I think it will be a long time. Thank you.
Very good. Just a couple more comments.
One thing that I'd like to add as well as a supplement is that to sell this idea to non-believers, I personally believe that the language that we use to communicate in English must consist only of 1 and 2 syllable words. Seriously, because otherwise it's too complicated for laymen to get. Thank you.
I think the reproducibility issue is a real matter, and I believe it's a euphemism for saying that cold fusion doesn't exist. And there's a quick response for that I'll share with you that you can use with the skeptics. The treatment of breast carcinoma, for example, a woman who's afflicted with a stage 1 lesion, we will cure 18 or 19 out of 20 of these women. But it's not reproducible. There's no way we'll know who we can cure. And you might ask the skeptic if they would not let their wife or themselves get treatment because that's not reproducible.
That was a very, I think, relevant and very pithy comment. I think that is a very good point. And if absolute reproducibility was always required, we would still be amplifying my voice with vacuum tubes. I don't think we would have gotten to vacuum tubes. Okay, so very good. And okay, 1 second, and then we'll move to the
I'd like to add to the comment to get real. I think the reality is the solution is going to be from the people who are here at this conference. And the reason I say that, we talk about we've got to convince the physics community. Early on, remember the word was, well, the calorimetry is in error and that's the problem. Once you correct the calorimetry, you won't see any heat. We've done that. Early on, the statement was, well, any neutrons that will be produced, even if you only produce 1, that's significant. That would mean it's nuclear. That's something we would have to do. We're producing lots of neutrons. We're producing lots of particles. We're producing lots of things. The bar keeps getting raised. The comment was, if you can boil water for a cup of tea, then I'll believe it. Mike, how many cups of water can you boil?
I calculated that for the CBS guys, like 1,500 cups of water in one of my experiments.
Yeah. Case made. So by spending a lot of time trying to convince other people, we're just spending a lot of time. Now for me, the most important person to convince is myself, followed closely by my wife. I'm not spending my kids' inheritance yet, so I don't have to convince them. But I think that's probably the same for most of us here. Now, this is not all a bad news story. If all of a sudden we convinced people that this was real, most of the people sitting in this room would quickly be brushed aside because the big companies would come in, they would dump tons of money, they've got resources. DOE would have known it all along, and they would be funding it. And so don't despair because we can't convince the other people, because people aren't dumping a lot of money. And I made a rather, they probably didn't like the observation I made, but I was talking to someone and they said, well, you know, we at DOE, we don't fund it because, you know, Nature isn't publishing in it. And I said, gee, I find that very interesting that Nature is setting the energy policy for the United States. We didn't get funding from them, but I think that's probably beyond. But that's the reality we have. You know, we're in a catch-22, and I guess my observation is get real. Let's don't despair. Let's meet in 18 months in Italy and continue to advance the field.
Absolutely.